Good evening. My name is Scott Williamson. I do a weekly show here on the Borg Skeptic channel called Exploring Epistemology. Hello again. The goal of my show here, of course, is to encourage healthy skepticism in as many people as I can. The reason for this goal is connected to the fact that the society that I and you and my children that we live in is made up of people who hold certain values and beliefs. And these values and beliefs are reflected in the society and culture that we all live in. So if these values and beliefs are in fact informed by people that make up these societies, then it seems that these beliefs and values should be arrived at using the most effective tools and methods possible to arrive at those beliefs. So this show is all about that, and it's my contribution to that end goal. I'd like to go ahead and introduce my guests. This is going to be Reed Nice Wonder from Cordial Curiosity. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing really well. Thanks, Scott, for having me on.
Great. And we have Justin Fowler. How are you doing, my friend?
Yeah, I'm pretty good.
Good to hear it. Good to hear it. I'm just kind of stoked that we're all together and we're gonna really do this tonight. You know, this is all about street epistemology. I am sort of new at street epistemology still, even though I try to practice it whenever I'm engaging with people, whether it's about politics or religion or philosophy or worldviews or what have you. The reason I like it is because it seems like it's just a better method at having productive conversations. So much of the time, you know, when it comes to really sensitive topics, it can really disintegrate into a bad conversation or even close up altogether communication. So I think for me anyways, more important than what people believe, to me what's fascinating is how people actually come to those beliefs, like how we connect those dots, right? And so when I discovered Reed Nice Wonder on YouTube, I was really like sold. I was like, wow, this is something different. Reed, can you tell us a little bit about how you got started in that?
Sure, yeah. I was interested in skepticism and critical thinking back in like 2011 or so, and I heard about this book called A Manual for Creating Atheists in 2013, and I didn't really think about it too much. I liked the book. That was the book where street epistemology was originally coined by Peter Boghossian. And then I discovered Anthony Magnabosco's videos in around 2015. And that's what, inspired me to really look into street epistemology, seeing his example videos. And over the years, I've been just involved in the community. I started my own YouTube channel in 2016, where I went out and started practicing and uploading videos. And we started a nonprofit, Street Epistemology International, to help people learn more about this method and to support people who ever want to practice it in some way back in 2019, and just been working on that since then. It's been fun.
Cool, man. Justin, a little bit about yourself. What is your background? How did you come to be who you are today?
Well, I could go into a long version or a short version, but basically, so I'm a Christian, and I was raised Christian when I was a little kid in the South, and sort of evangelical, loosely speaking, Pentecostal. So I had a sort of experiential aspect to my faith and whatnot, and but anyway, so I believe, just kind of implicitly what I received up until a certain point I think I was this was about 2002, 2003. And so I think I was about 1920 or something like that. And I started to have doubts. So I'm trying to give kind of a summary of my journey, but I went on the site called christianburner.com. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of it. But it was a very hostile. They had a lot of aggressive rhetoric against Christianity. And this was before new atheism was, on the scene, of course. And but I decided, I'm just going to jump in and do my best, And so I would get into some debates and whatnot, but it actually caused some doubt a little bit for me. Even though I was pretty confident in my beliefs, it did chip away a bit. And I came to a point where I realized I don't know for sure if what I believe is true, and what if it's not? And it was kind of scary. It was like stepping into the void, falling off over the brink. And that's what it really felt like falling into a black hole or something. But I decided, well, I'd rather know the truth than just kind of go along. So I decided to, apply some skepticism. And I actually did have an agnostic period, loosely speaking. I was kind of practicing my faith a little bit, but I was still plagued by doubt a lot. And so I can't really quantify that very well for you. I just know that I let that skepticism kind of wash over me. And so, like I told you before, my belief took on a very experiential tone, and it still has now. But I have a rational undergirding now. But back then, it was just sort of, judging by my life experience and my first person perspective and all that. And, I would go out in nature and just kind of wash away everything I think I believe or anything like that, and just observe nature. And as I did it, it felt like there was some kind of presence behind nature that kept it all together and was like rational or something, but it was beyond human rational. It was beyond a human mind, but it was like something there, and it was just like a kind of a sense that I had. And so I kind of went with that for a while. Then I had to have doubts later on again. And so I struggled with the whole creationism thing. And I didn't struggle. It wasn't like an existential struggle on that front, because my church, it was pretty much accepted that there was a debate and it was fine. You weren't like an outcast if you believed that Earth was old and everything like that. So it was acceptable thing. But I was just wasn't sure, and then I started researching that first, and I used to be kind of almost enamored by young Earth creationism because it just seemed so cool at the time.
Okay.
But now I think older, evolution, all that is cooler. Now I do believe in evolution.
Okay.
So, but it was just a long process, and I went fighting, but I was looking at Hugh Ross, reasons to believe and all that. And and then I went down kind of the rabbit hole, and I actually started debating atheists and people with different faith perspectives online on Facebook. Around 2010, I guess it was. And that's when before then, I encountered some arguments for God, like cosmological arguments for God and whatnot. Before then, I felt it just seemed so dry to me. Like, what's the point of this? But then when I started to be arrested by so much doubt, I was like, okay, now I need to really know for sure. I need to get in depth and understand and be confident in what I believe, and not try to use sort of ad hoc reasoning or convenient reasoning or anything, not leave any corner uninvestigated. And so little by little, I've just kind of changed my perspective over time. Because I want to know for myself. I'm not just trying to prove something to someone. I actually want to know,
Right.
So now then I started listening to debates about cosmological argument and lectures and things like that. And I just got deeper and deeper and deeper until I finally, I came to what's called Thomism. I don't know if you're familiar with it. Yeah, Aquinas. And then I got deep into classical theism. And that's pretty much where I'm at now. And so that's a summary sort of thing.
Right. So I know you from, Fight on the Fence, which is a Facebook group. It's a debate group. And I guess it's kind of evenly split between theists and atheists at this point. I think I've been with the group for about 3 years, and I've always had an affinity towards debating. I don't know why. I guess it's an ego thing. I don't know. And I try to, I always tell people before I do these sort of debates that it really has less to do with your beliefs than it does with your arguments, right? Like, I think it's kind of good to kind of attack someone's arguments. Because look, I mean, let's face it, it's kind of a sport, right? Like, I could believe in totally wrong things. And I admit I'm probably 100% wrong on a lot of things that I believe, right?
Right.
So, but we can recognize good and bad arguments within a certain framework. If we have certain rules we're trying to play by, I think we could sort of examine those arguments and see if they hand up, stand up to scrutiny, so to speak. But like I said, people can believe in wrong things and have great arguments, and they're all consistent. And the same thing, vice versa. You can have, so I just find that whole thing fascinating and fun. And I've learned a lot about, fallacies and how to recognize them and things of that nature. And so I noticed that with the fight on the fence, sometimes we have conversations and we sort of talk about things, and these sort of conversations a lot of time devolve into petty argumentation and stuff like that. And, the difference between me and you is that we never do that. We end up for some reason just agreeing on a lot of things. And, even though we might not agree on our conclusions, we kind of understand, like, oh, that's a bad argument, this is a good argument. And I've noticed that with you, that you're very, and I've appreciate that with you, that you seem very sincere and out to understand truth. You're not just there to, just argue for your beliefs and without good reasons for them. At least you try to do that. And I think that's really cool. As far as my background, I know you don't know if you know much about my background, Justin, and I know Reed doesn't know me from a can of paint at this point, but I have a background in religion. I grew up not in a very religious home. Maybe we were religious by label or by culture or society. Like, we were Christian, but we didn't go to church and stuff like that all the time. But when I turned, I guess around the same age you did, Justin, around 19, 20 years old, I got into wanting to understand like these existential questions, like the meaning of life. Why are we here? Why is there something rather than nothing? All of these questions that most people ask. And it seems like they start having these sort of problems or questions that they want answered around that age, which I find is really kind of interesting. But
makes sense.
It happened for me that way too. And so I got with different churches. Like, the first thing I did is I joined like a Church of Christ, and I learned all about that, and I was really zealous and became like a youth leader there for the church back then. And then I kind of had problems with some of the teachings. I didn't quite understand them, and I've always been someone that kind of wants to understand things, if they're true or not, as much as possible. And then, the Jehovah Witness people came around my door, and I started listening to them. And so I started falling in there, and I became a Jehovah Witness.
Oh, wow.
Very zealous. I became a leader in that organization. And I was out there, arguing with people, arguing with ministers, talking to people of all kinds of different religions. And that's probably where I learned about religion the most, because it was so interactive. And it was so, one-on-one. It's like I didn't learn about Hinduism or the Muslims from my preacher or whoever was at church or whatever in passing or something like that. This was like by going directly to their house and challenging their beliefs one-on-one and having to hear why they believe what and I had to like try to debate them at their doors and stuff and have Bible studies. And I was 100% into that stuff. Like, I was probably the most zealous Jehovah's Witness you'd ever want to meet. But then, a few years in, I started to question. I ran across an atheist at my job who asked me and he was very nice, very polite about it. And I thought that was kind of strange because I had heard so much about atheists are these people that are angry and they're mad at God and they just want to bring people to hell with them and stuff like that. So it was really surprising to see this guy was really nice and he was very reasonable. He's helping me understand, and he was very patient with me because I couldn't understand how, when I look back at it, how much patience an unbeliever had to be to deal with me because I was so stubborn and 100% certain, or I thought I was, about what it was I was trying to convince. And I thought it was my moral duty to convince people that they had to be a Jehovah's Witness like me. And at the end of the day, he asked so many questions, and I finally decided, you know what? These questions I really can't answer, like they're really good questions. Like why I'm so certain in my beliefs, but he's right. Other people that I talk to are just as certain as I am, and for the same reasons. So what method am I using that's going to, I could be mistaken just like they are. Why am I so stubborn in my beliefs? So I just started questioning that. I started looking at philosophy and looking at epistemology and trying to figure this stuff out as a young guy. And it just led me into skepticism. And then it got to the point where I just couldn't continue trying to convert people into stuff that I was halfway convinced about anymore. And so just as a moral, conscientious thing, I had to step down, and relinquish my position and title and got out of the organization. And there was a point in time I was this angry atheist because I felt like, hey, I've been misled by this church and these people and this, and it wasted a lot of my time. And then, so I went through that phase, and then I went through the phase of just being at peace with it. And I've just learned to embrace not knowing, to where I can say, I don't know the answer to some of these questions, but guess what? It's okay. And that's just where I am today. And so, yeah, I'm just really comfortable with saying I don't know. And I think that's a superpower.
Yeah, there are questions on which I'm comfortable with saying I don't know as well. And I've gotten frustrated at times when it seems like people are unable to say that. I'm like, why don't you just start with I don't know, rather than like, just because there's no evidence for this conclusion, just saying, well, I just need to see evidence, rather than saying, well, that doesn't, that's not real or something like that. So yeah, I respect that. And I think that's a good, healthy exercise.
Yeah. I think so. And Reed, I don't know much about your background. Did you have a deep religious background, or have you always been an unbeliever or a skeptic with certain things, or if you even are? I don't even know.
Yeah, I grew up in a nominally Christian family. We would go to church Easter and Christmas growing up, and then in high school went to boarding school, took an Eastern religions class. That opened my mind, like, wow, people by the billions believe in Hinduism. What? That's weird. And then going to college, I had an atheist roommate. We didn't talk about religion at all, but just knowing someone who didn't believe, he was a nice guy. I'm sure that had an influence socially in some way. And then after I graduated college, same age, that usual age, where you start asking yourself these questions. It was Reddit was there at the time, and the atheism subreddit was like a default subreddit just by going on Reddit. And I saw like people arguing about these things. I saw links to the atheist experience, and that led me down a rabbit hole on atheism YouTube. And it wasn't very long until I just shedded the rest of that religious belief. But then I got into skepticism and critical thinking over the years, reading books and other things from new atheist authors and other stuff. That's
Cool.
Oh, okay. Cool, man. So you pretty much just on your own, just did your own personal research that kind of led you to epistemology and that kind of stuff. Well, I tell you, man, I think the first street epistemology I ran across was Anthony Magnabosco. That was back in 2014, because I was a junkie. Like I was watching, the debates the atheist theist debates, and I was just hooked on that kind of stuff for whatever reason. Maybe I'm just weird like that, but at some point, you come to it becomes kind of boring, and you start realizing what's the point with all this debating? Like, what are we trying to really do here? And I ran across Anthony Magnabosco, and I saw a lecture that he was giving on street epistemology. And I found it fascinating, and I liked it. And then I think the second person I found was you, Reed, with Cordial Curiosity. And I felt like, and I became a fan. Like, I think I've watched just about every one of your videos up until the lockdown. I know that you kind of stopped going out as much and stuff. But I probably watched every one of those videos.
Wow.
And I really got inspired. Like, I wanted to have those kind of conversations and truly help people, like, not just about religion, that question, but just about everything. Like, I think I just started putting it together, like, what, how we arrive at things is probably the more important thing here. Like, that's going to make us more informed as people and move us forward, and I really believe that. And just watching Reed do it was so you just have that stuff mastered. I think you in your videos entertaining. I like your demeanor. You really are cordial. I mean, I love it, And then I think I saw Ty after that, and then and I got involved in the SE groups and stuff, and met Ty, and now I'm on the radio show with him every Sunday, the Free Thought Radio Hour, and we talk about stuff like that, different topics rather. And that's how I got into it, thanks to you.
Cool. Yeah, and here's my friend Dolly. We're now going out again in public here in Los Angeles on Sundays, and I have a whole stack of content I need to edit, but I have run out of time. But hopefully I'll have that out soon.
Oh, wow. Okay, cool, man. Well, part of the thing tonight is I wanted to do a little bit of an exercise with Justin. Justin's a Christian. I'll be asking him a few questions and kind of, trying to practice a little bit. Reed is going to listen in and kind of at the end of this exercise, kind of give us his view on the conversation and everything like that. The number one thing, first of all, that I want to make clear too, is that this is not a debate, right? This is not the kind of like, make fun of somebody or have gotcha questions. It's really just the Socratic method. We're just trying to figure out how you come to know what you do. And kind of like the way I like to put it is, how your science teacher or math teacher would ask you to solve a math problem. And she'd want you to show your work. It wasn't as so important as the answer as to how you got to the answer. How did you show your work? And so that's what we're kind of interested in this. So are you ready to kind of give this a shot?
Sure.
All right. Well, I guess the first thing I'd want to know is when it comes to your Christian belief, how confident would you be? Like, let's say on a confidence scale, 1 to 100, 100 being totally closed-minded that it is false, and 1 being, a 0 being closed-minded to the fact that it's false, or rather 100 being that it's true. I'm sorry, I'm already messing up. 100 being you're 100% convinced it's true, 0 being you're 0% confident that it's true at all. It's that you're closed-minded. Where would you put yourself on that scale if you had to?
I'm just going to say at this point, I'm just at 100%.
100%. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Well, like, I'm sure, like when we talk about this kind of stuff, I'm sure there are many reasons that you have for that high confidence, right?
Yeah.
But if you could start off with just one main reason, what would that reason be for why you believe Christianity is true?
I would say that as far as the rational, undergirding, it's that the New Testament is, in its historicity, is very strong, and there's multiple attestation when it comes to the Gospels and even non-Christian sources verifying certain facts about Jesus' life. And it is very hard to get around the argument toward the resurrection. And there are several lines of evidence, and it would take some time to unpack that. But yeah, it was just the historical basis.
The historical basis. Okay. So what I'm hearing you say is that there's so much historical evidence in your mind that this creates this confidence of 100% that Christianity is true.
Right.
And I guess just to be clear, and I know we've probably talked about it already, you're defining Christianity as the core proposition that Jesus rose from the dead, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah,
for
okay.
our sins. Okay.
Yeah, I'll just clarify. Yeah, so specifically, what part of the necessary element of those that Jesus is God in human flesh, incarnated, and he had a ministry, of course, healing and all that, and then died for our sins, was buried, rose again, and ascended, and interceding, for the Father for us. That's the core tenets right there. So if that's true, you could take, like, say, someone might not have to be, a complete inerrantist about the Bible, about everything that's in the Bible, even though it might be hard to, subtract large elements of the Bible and be consistent, but you could still take or leave certain things and still hold to those tenets, and that would be the essential faith.
Gotcha. So that essential part of the Christian narrative is really the biggest factor.
Right.
That's okay. Now, do you have, like, in other words, if I ask you, is there anything, if there was something that caused you doubt, like if you were somehow persuaded that the resurrection or part of the story of the resurrection didn't add up, would that bring your confidence down a little bit? Like, is there a marker that you would have to even lower your confidence at this point?
Yeah, let me think about that for a sec, because that's a good question. It's almost like, I'm just saying from my perspective, it's almost, since the evidence is there, it's almost a pointless question to me. But I'm going to humor the question, because it's not necessarily, not everybody's convinced that the evidence is there, right? So I'll just say that if there was, the core basis for the evidentiary argument is the strength of the testimony. So if the strength of the testimony were chipped away at, that would make it, that would definitely lower the rational confidence I would have in the resurrection. There's something, some discovery that chipped away at that, of course, my rational confidence in it would kind of decrease a little bit. So it'd be like, well, what happened? Some of this information has been degraded. Will more of it be degraded over time? So I guess that would be the main thing. And there are probably a couple or so different facts involved in that. That would be involved, like the disciples, part of the core strength of it is that they, there's a testimony that they saw him together after his resurrection. And group experiences are going to be more solid than just someone just seeing something, on the fly. And also, if the testimony is actually very late, which I don't see how that could be possible now at this point, when you actually have the historical documents. But I guess the group aspect, if they didn't actually see him as a group, that would be one area where decreased confidence, I suppose.
So it would be the group, and you said that something about the dating.
Yeah. So we actually have, historians have very good manuscript evidence that goes back very early, especially when you compare it to other historical documents. So it'd be, we already have a plethora of documents that show it does go back very early, and most scholars at least dated, those documents in the 1st century.
Hmm.
That would be within living memory, because Jesus would have died around 30 AD or so. So, so I don't see how that would happen. But yeah, if it did happen, yeah, of course. Yeah.
Could just trying to step out of the and do sort of an internal critique. Let's say someone makes a claim like Allah is real, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's say that they report some sort of miracle and it happened within the time frame that say that you're claiming that, like, the eyewitnesses of Jesus's resurrection happened, right? Would that cause you to then say that there's good evidence that Islam is true? If some sort of marker was set for Islam being true and it was done within that specific time frame, if that makes sense. Let's say maybe a better example would be say like the sighting of the Virgin Mary, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think what you're saying is, like, if someone were to see or report like the Virgin Mary appeared in the sky in front of like 500 to 1,000 people. Well, if that story came together, 50, 60 years from the time this supposed event happened, you wouldn't be so confident as if someone said, as if that story happened like maybe a day after that event supposedly happened, right?
It depends on how what testimony we have. If it were just people saying, "Oh, I remember seeing this image such a date," or maybe they only have the year exactly, or or whatever. But if other people were corroborating that, if they were saying the exact same thing, I would suspect that they might be conspiring together. But if they were kind of giving their own description and it kind of had its own flavor to it, like it sounded different, and maybe the details were a little different, but they basically were describing the same thing. And even if it was 50 years later, I'd be like, oh, that sounds like something may have happened. And it wouldn't matter if it was as long. I mean, I think they're, okay, so I believe in the supernatural, of course. And I believe there are supernatural entities behind other religions. It wouldn't really faze me as to that. The thing is that for me, the resurrection is different because it involves new creation. So it's very unique in that regard. It's not just a supernatural event.
Okay, so when you say new creation, what do you mean by that specifically?
Well, basically what the scripture is getting at is that because this world is fallen, in order to restore it, God has to basically remake it. And theologically, this has happened through Jesus Christ and his crucifixion and burial and resurrection, is that through his, through that, he has been given the power to, recreate our world and restore it. So it's a totally different paradigm. It's not just a supernatural event.
Gotcha. So without that paradigm being in place, the resurrection wouldn't have the same sort of import for you. Is that fair to say?
Oh, say it again. Sorry.
Like without that paradigm of, say, needing a savior, a fallen world, what you were just talking about, without that paradigm in place, would the story of the resurrection have as much import or power to it?
Oh, right. Okay. Well, no, because and again, this is one of those things where it's like, I don't know how I would see it differently, but no, it wouldn't, because it's like, I mean, what is he saving us to? What is he saving us from? That kind of thing. So of course not, but
I see what you mean. So you would need that. You would need to accept that paradigm as kind of it's kind of like a chair that kind of stands up on some legs. You take one of those one of those support stands would be the paradigm that you're talking about, a fallen world. Is that correct?
Let me backtrack a second, because I
Okay.
was actually listening to someone talk about this very subject and made a great point. And I was thinking about this even as I was explaining it to you, but I'll give a quick illustration. I remember the founder of Apple, Steve Jobs, one time he said, "Customers don't know what they want until I offer it." So nobody knew that they wanted an iPhone before they saw an iPhone in the market. So there's actually, it is true that we live in a world that's plagued by corruption, not only political corruption, societal corruption, but even, within ourselves, we can observe sometimes. But death, decay, and all that, we can observe those things, but we wouldn't know the full extent of it if we didn't have something to compare it against or to contrast it against. And by, as we know from the Gospels, the disciples weren't even expecting for Jesus to die and rise again. If we didn't have that revelation of resurrected Christ and what that means for our world, we wouldn't actually know the full extent of what, in light of that, how far we are away from that ideal. So in a certain sense, it actually supplies that narrative in and of itself. You know what I mean?
Okay. So the resurrection, you're saying, I guess it's still at the end of the day, the import of the resurrection depends on a prior belief of a fallen world, right? Or are you saying that the resurrection sort of illustrates that we live in a fallen world?
Yeah, I think actually both are kind of true. Well, let me clarify. I wouldn't say it necessarily. This is actually kind of a new thought for me, so I'm actually
Okay.
looking at it right now. But I wouldn't say it necessarily relies on Okay, it doesn't necessarily rely on the theological understanding of a fallen world. Like we can observe that the world has problems, but we wouldn't necessarily attribute that to fallenness, right? Because atheists likewise know that there's things that are less than ideal. Most atheists would say that, I think. Even religion itself, most of the time, is a kind of a flaw in our world or something like that. But but they might not attribute to fallenness. So I'd say that it's not, to me, it doesn't like strictly rely on that in so much as it demonstrates the reality of it. And
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, so well, that brings up another question that, and I'm trying not to go deep down there. I'm trying to stay on a track here, but you're kind of bringing up some things that are related and that kind of really maybe help push the conversation along. You mentioned that other people have different views to explain what we see about the world.
Right.
Like we see death, we see bad atrocities, people do evil things to each other, for example. And the Christian story, from what you're telling me, is that this comes from the fallen world as described maybe in the Bible or in your religious tradition, that this explains why we need a savior to begin with, because we live in this fallen world for X reasons, right?
Right.
How did you rule out maybe the atheist explanation or the Hindu explanation or the there's different worldviews to explain what we see in the world that maybe you're describing as a fallen world. How did you rule out that the Christian narrative was more closer to being true?
So as for Hinduism, I'm not, that educated on what their account of such things are. I'm not sure if they actually, because I'll just sidestep that because I'm not educated enough on
Mhm.
to be able to comment. But as for atheism, I will say that I guess it could be, so some people say that the argument for the resurrection is strong if you undergird it with the existence of God, and they'll use other arguments for the existence of God. I suppose that some people could go from the resurrection to realize, coming to believe that God does exist. So I guess that might depend on the person, but I will say that it definitely helps to first have a prior understanding. This would be a prior view that the resurrection could rely on, is that God exists. And now we go further than that. I'm actually sort of philosophical idealist, which means that I believe that reality is based in consciousness. And that's not like the woo-woo subjective idealism. It's like an objective, for instance, I rely on, I should say I rely on, but I think part of the strength of this is that modern physics, they're more and more going towards information as an explanation of reality. And there's a lot of lines of evidence like the holographic principle and quantum gravity and things like that. Yeah, consciousness, if consciousness is the basis of reality, then really this would best make sense if you had basically I'll just give you my worldview. There's God, and then there's also intelligent agents. You're not human, but they are, like what a lot of people will call angels. You can forget the trappings of wings and things like that, but just intelligent agents below space-time. And as well as human agents who have the ability to make choices which affect where reality goes. And so I had to give all that backdrop, and I was trying to remember where I was going to go with the how I ruled out other explanations.
I was kind of looking for the answer. Like you said, there's these bad things that happen in the world. We live in a fallen world. We have different explanations. Buddhism has an explanation for it. Hindus have an explanation for why the world is as we see it, and there's a solution that they give. How did you rule those out?
I'll admit I haven't researched every religion. I kind of am somewhat familiar with other religions, so yeah, that would be a task to go come down one.
Then that kind of leads to a question. Can you rule out things that you don't know about?
It depends on if they're possible or not.
But I mean, if you don't know
right,
what they are, like you said, you don't really know what the Hindu solution is or explanation is, right?
Right.
How do you know 100% that they're wrong if you're not even sure what their position is?
Well, so basically, I've followed the metaphysics from classical theism towards its inevitable conclusion, and this is sort of that would be an exhaustive undertaking.
Yeah,
but
it's kind of a closed question. I didn't want to go into a closed question like that, but I guess what I'd rather want to do is kind of do, what we're trying to do is figure out how you come to know things to be true. So, basically, just to kind of recap where we're at, first of all, you're saying that, you're 100% that Jesus rose from the dead. The importance of it is kind of based on the paradigm of a fallen world. And that's what And so I'm trying to figure out how does that connect to it being true?
How does restate that last question?
Yeah. So how does us living in a fallen world lead you to believe that Jesus did in fact rise from the dead? I guess that's where I'm at.
I don't think that. I don't think that the living in a fallen world convinces me that Jesus rose from the dead.
Is there another reason you might be able to introduce? Maybe I'm misunderstanding.
You could say that the belief that we live in a fallen world is necessary but not sufficient. I'm just saying it's not sufficient to, in and of itself, to believe that Jesus rose from the dead.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you think of another reason then that would give you reason to think that Jesus rose from the dead?
Other than the historical argument, I mean?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, is that I just want to narrow it down to say it's the historical or not, or if there's any other factors that I might overlook.
Now, we've discussed this a little bit in the group. I don't remember if I discussed it with you, but the Shroud of Turin is, I think, yeah. Now, I know as soon as I say that, the thing that's going to spring to everybody's mind is the carbon-14 dating that was done on the Shroud in 1988. And there have been powerful arguments as to why that's not legitimate. And the main one that has been named is, and that there's been a peer-reviewed article done on this, and I think it was 2019, showing that the fabric of the part they tested was different than the fabric, the main body of the fabric. So it was actually a later addition because it was burned in a fire and they repaired it. So it was the repair cloth. There is another argument I heard the other day, which is a lot more technical and has to do with if the image was created by radiation, then there's this guy was a nuclear scientist, so his explanation went way over my head. But that different parts of the cloth would actually test differently, and you could have parts of the cloth that were closer to more intense parts of the radiation that could date to like 4000 AD or something like that. So there's something technical in the nuclear or the.
Are you saying that the radiation or the residual radiation evidence sort of proves that the resurrection has a supernatural explanation?
I think it's so powerful that it's very hard to get away from it because of the fact that what you have is, it's not, first of all, they used to think it was painted. It wasn't painted. What you have are the fibers of the shroud. If you look at them at a microscopic level, I think I'm trying to think, I think he said something like 200 microns length or something like that. And it was like the 1 or 2 microns top layer, superficial layer, were burned. And it's very hard to explain how you would burn the cloth that superficially and create an image that robust. And there's no side image. So if there was a metal, like say heated metal object that you put the cloth over to get the imprint of that image, there's no side image. You can't see like the ears from the side. It's just all front view. So what they conclude is the shroud must have been taut somehow, like tight and straight, and the image imprinted somehow without losing its integrity from the, there's a gap between the body and the cloth, and somehow the image didn't lose its informational integrity, and it's holographic, and it's like a negative photographic image. So it's very, very hard to explain how anyone would have forged that. And
so what I understand is that there's this new evidence about the shroud that's very hard to explain, and this lends confidence that it must have been a resurrection, that happened. Okay. If there was, let's say not saying they did, but let's say that, they found out for sure that, to 100% of your satisfaction, or a very high degree of your satisfaction, that the Shroud of Turin was dated to, like, say, 800 AD or 1000 AD. Would that affect your confidence that the resurrection happened or not? Would that have anything to do with it?
Oh no, it wouldn't affect my belief.
Okay, perfect. So really, we're talking about, mainly for you, it's just the historical evidence.
Yeah, I will say that Christianity has a personal impact for me that is hard for me to personally explain, other than Jesus being real and alive. But that would be I can't reproduce that for other people, but it does have meaning for me.
Okay.
So I will say that there is that dimension as well, but I think the rational argument could stand on its own.
So if a Hindu told you that they had a really strong personal experience of Vishnu or Krishna in their life, and it was very appealing, could they be mistaken that their religion is true?
They could be mistaken. I would, if okay, if they talk to me face to face, and it seemed very authentic to me in a way I found it hard to deny. I would take it on face value that they experienced deity, because I don't disbelieve that there are other deities.
Okay, interesting. I know a lot of Christians don't say that, so that's kind of new for me. Okay. So you don't disbelieve that there are other deities,
right?
Obviously. Okay. But the resurrection, would you say that you believe in other deities because of the resurrection, or do you believe that the resurrection could have happened because there's this thing called deities that exists, or supernatural?
Oh,
like what comes first? What's first, the chicken or the egg type of question?
Well, I would say that you have to at least be open to the fact that the supernatural could be real in order to believe in the resurrection. If you firmly believe naturalism was true, then yeah, that wouldn't make any sense. I mean, you could believe maybe Jesus rose from the dead and there's a natural cause we don't know of. I don't know how people would square that circle. At least that's how it seemed to me. But you could potentially believe that. But if you don't believe, there's possibly a supernatural, I don't know how you believe that Jesus is God in the flesh, he rose from the dead.
Is something possible mean that it's necessarily true?
No.
Okay. So how would you get from possibility to high confidence that it's true?
I would say that, I think that naturalism actually kind of contradicts the value of reason, because if naturalism is true, we would have no reason to believe that it was true, because reason wouldn't rule reality. In order for reason to rule reality, and therefore there to be truth at all, there has to be some kind of metaphysical undergirding.
Okay.
And I believe that, it wouldn't make sense for it to not have agency as well, because, it's hard to understand how an abstract object could just cause anything to be without having agency. So if a being had reason and agency and ruled the universe, you'd call that God. So I don't understand how someone could believe that naturalism is the truth if it kind of undermines reason, so to speak. You wouldn't have any reality. Could just be absurd, and there's no undergirding reason behind anything. It's just ridiculous. They're absurdists like Albert Camus. Reality was just absurd. But that would be, I think, fully consistent atheism or naturalism. I was just say fully consistent, like naturalism, not necessarily atheism.
Yeah. So I was going to ask you, could it be possible that there's an unknown natural reason, like an unknown natural property, that gives us this idea of reasonable? Like maybe there is no underlying reason to things that we understand. Maybe is it possible that there's some sort of natural, that's not a God, just some property that's unknown that isn't a God that could explain these things? Is it possible in your mind?
I don't think you can rationally state that it's possible, because your statement would be absurd at that point, because reality would be absurd. So I don't think you could rationally state that it's possible. It seems like it would be, as long as you're using reason as a baseline, then you just have to rule it out by default.
Okay. So what you're saying is, and when you say that this underlying reason to rationale has to be God, and how are you defining God? I guess is the Christian God, but there's all sorts of different interpretations of what that means, as I'm learning tonight. Because you've got different beliefs than many people that I've spoken to, they're Christians. So I want to clarify that,
Right. I would say that my definition of God would be just the very basic definition. And I would say that this is, like I cited classical theism, and that's actually a view that's shared by people across faiths and worldviews. So you don't necessarily have to be a Christian to be a classical theist. Now, I do think that Trinitarianism is necessary, and it explains much about reality. But just starting with the being of God itself. Let's see. I'm trying to remember what your question was again.
Is it possible that there's some underlying feature that we just don't know about that's not a God? Because I was trying to ask you, what is your definition of God in this case? And like I said, I know that you're a Christian, but there's a lot of different concepts of the Christian God as we find out.
Right. So I'm Orthodox Christian.
Like for example, does God have to be conscious? Does God have to be loving? Does God have to have like certain properties? Are those necessary for God to exist? Or can, or is God so nebulous, like sort of a nebulous sort of God?
Oh, yes.
In your view.
Okay. So this gets into the apophatic way, which is so basically I believe in divine simplicity. I think this is the only rational way you can understand the existence of God, and that God has actually one single attribute which we interpret in different ways, and we see different derivative attributes like wisdom and love and things like that. And those are sort of our understanding that kind of encompasses those particular attributes. But in reality, God's existence in nature is divinely simple. So I would say my definition of God is actually pretty basic, in that when you have essential reason and agency, and my wording is going to be analogical because it can't be direct, because God is beyond our comprehension, but it's an analogical way of saying it. When you have reason and agency as the ultimate fact of reality, then you have God, because it wouldn't be subpersonal, it would be super personal. It would
super personal. Okay. Yeah. Well, we're kind of coming up at the end of the show. I wish I could go on and on and on, but I'll ask one more question. Okay. Only because I think the resurrection you stated was the main reason for your belief in Christianity. So I'll just ask this hypothetical. Suppose you had a time machine, right? And with this time machine, you could go back to, the days of Jesus, to the first century. Now, suppose you found out that Jesus was in fact crucified, was buried, but that Jesus was never resurrected at all. Maybe he was buried in a mass grave. Suppose you could somehow confirm this by finding his actual grave and his bones, and you were able to test sufficiently enough to convince yourself to almost 100% certainty that Jesus did not in fact resurrect at all, right?
Mm-hmm.
What could you possibly imagine or come up with that would explain the rise of Christianity and the gospel stories as we interpret them today?
Oh, that's a good question. That would be very hard to answer. I thought you were going to go as far as asking me if I would cease to believe in Christianity.
No, I know you would, because you mentioned that was your main reason. But I'm just saying, if for some weird reason, could you imagine a hypothesis that would be alternative to the resurrection really happening? Just wondering if you ever gave thought to that.
I can't.
Okay, no worries. We're coming up. Maybe it's something to think about, and we can revisit it at a later time. But you get the idea of what we're doing. We're just really taking what our interlocutor has to say as their reasons for believing whatever, right? And then just exploring that. We want to find out what is their most important reason, and just exploring from there. So I think
that's cool.
I think I'm done with that. We've run out of time, but I'll enjoy the conversation. Reed, are you still with us?
I am.
There he is. What did you think? This is like one of my first times actually trying to do this in a long time.
No worries.
That's rough.
No, I think you did a great job. I was still like trying to do the banners and everything, and still listen and hear everything.
Yep,
and
I saw that. Mm-hmm.
Really good job. There are some opportunities of stuff that I might want to go down. He mentioned like saving at one point. That's one potential psychosocial motivation I would want to go down that road. He mentioned some stuff about, very, very hard to explain. I'd love to explore how that in that connection to a reason, we can explore that more. You said this phrase, I'm just wondering. That's a really good phrase. Keeping that open, just modeling epistemic virtues like that. That's great. And the whole vibe was just chill and great. And I've never done SE like explaining what we're doing while someone is like doing SE. So
right.
I'm interested in Justin's like feedback of was that distracting? Like, wow, he's like, is this really sincere? If he's just doing these techniques, I might be thinking that if I'm in a conversation.
Oh no, yeah, that was cool. I think explaining where you're coming from is really a good way to go about it, in my opinion.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, this is what we're doing. We want to be transparent. We are following some techniques, and I think these are good to get people to genuinely reflect and talk about the beliefs. And this is my friend Dolly, who always
hello.
He was in the chat as well, listening. Do you have any feedback, Dolly?
It was the one filling up the live chat.
You have an even more powerful beard than I do. It's magnificent.
Oh, wow.
That's even better than I thought it was.
Stop
Awesome.
Beard comparisons here, showing off.
That's cool.
Oh, that's great.
I've got nothing.
Cool. Well, it was nice. Yeah, I like this.
Yeah. You guys had great rapport. Such good listening.
Great.
We have great vibe together, I guess.
Yeah,
that's the way it's supposed to. I think what we're trying to do is create like a very easygoing way to talk about, because these, as you know, Justin, like these are very sensitive topics.
Oh, yeah.
Like people get extremely upset about this stuff,
Oh yeah, I've been there.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, there was just one when you first tried the outsider test. There was just a lot of questions on questions, and it's hard though to get that though.
I would like to do that someday, research other religions and whatnot. That would be very interesting. I have learned a little bit about other religions, but not like super in depth. So that would be interesting.
I like religion for breakfast. It's a YouTube channel about comparative religions and history. Yeah. That's my regular input of comparative religions these days. Is the
nice. Okay. Yeah, I'll check that out. Cool. Thanks.
Yep. Right after this, I'm going to jump into a show and hopefully do some more SE. regarding a whole entirely different topic. So I'm glad I got my feet warm right now.
I'll have to watch that later.
You're all warmed up.
Yeah, I got warmed up here.
So.
Cool.
Yep. Well, look, man, thank you guys for coming on. I really appreciate the feedback, Reed. You've really been helpful, and maybe we can do this again at some point.
Cool.
Yeah, I enjoyed having you on, learning about both you guys more, and just look forward to speaking with you guys in the future, man. This was awesome, man.
Yeah, it was great.
Been looking forward to it all day today.
Yeah, me too.
Anytime.
Yeah. Cool.
All right. Well, I'm going to ship off onto my next show, and we will see you guys next week. Thanks for joining in, and keep SC alive. Let's keep on having good conversations. And until next time, peace.
Peace.
Bye.
Bye.